And thanks for that great introduction. Yeah, I'm Ali Motion. Today I'm going to talk about the 7 universal truths to data analytics when using Tableau. It's a bit of a grand title, but it's very much around some of my experiences over the last decade or so of using data analysis, and then the applications that when I've used Tableau. So just a little bit about me. So I am Ali Motion. I've been using Tableau for around 3 years, and really since I joined Process Evolution back in 2015. So we work with emergency services, so predominantly police and fire services, on a range of projects, but really it's around helping them make better decisions, so evidence-based decisions. So that might be the optimization of current resources, it might be deciding where to put some new bases, how many fire stations are required in a specific fire service, where to put them, what type of equipment and trucks they would need, etc. So a range of projects, and we use Tableau pretty much on a daily basis as one of our key analytical tools. I'm a big fan as well, so I need to get that out there. Very much a big fan of Tableau and what it enables us to do. Previously, before joining Process Evolution, I spent 8 years working with British Airways, so a range of projects from flight and cabin crew, rostering, through to commercial projects. Spending a lot of time at the end towards the end of my BA career on revenue management, so things like overbooking and how we improved the revenue management system within BA. So why have I chosen to give this talk? So I've been a consultant for over a decade now, so I've seen good and bad analysis throughout that period. And in my role just now, I come across lots of people with the phrases data analysis, analyst, consultant, guru in the title. And actually it's quite interesting for me around that the phrase analyst actually just there's a wealth or a range of capabilities and levels of training that can come with. So some are very skilled, whereas others I can use Excel and I might be able to open Tableau. So very much a range there. I think one of the key things for me is that Tableau is a fantastic tool. It's really easy to use, and actually the ability to get going with Tableau is second to none. You start a training course in the morning, and by the afternoon you have some nice visualizations. You can bring your data in very quickly and start to get some insights. I suppose the concern there, or the issue around that is it's easy to use, but gives you that speed to market. But the various pitfalls, or it just gives you that greater scope to encounter significant problems around your analysis. Just in terms of the next 15 minutes or so, this isn't going to be a technical talk. This is very much more about the process and things to think about when you're applying data viz and analytics. So some of the sorts of things that maybe challenge people's thinking, and just go through some thoughts on where improvements could be made. Also, I don't mean to preach here. By no means am I getting this right every time, but very much around my experiences over the last decade or so, and hopefully give you a framework or a few sort of rules of thumb to assess your own analysis. In work, I head up a CI team. As part of my role is around continuous improvement, and I think it's really important to have some form of self-reflection, improving the capabilities within what we do. So that's always a key thing of saying that even though we may have done things well, are there things we can improve on in the future? So rule number 1, or in fact they're not really rules, just things to think about, I suppose: do no harm. So as doctors, when they start, they're asked to take the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. And I suppose it's not something as data professionals that we're asked to do, but maybe it's something we should be thinking about. Nobody really sets out to make bad graphics, so everybody sets off with good intentions, but we do see some interesting or some poor data viz out in the wild. So whether that's truncated axes, people with inconsistent scaling in terms of using a dual axis that doesn't quite make sense, abusing percentages, or cherry picking the data time period. So I'm not going to go into this. I'm sure there's been many talks and lots of detail around this. If you do want to see some bad graphics, viz.wtf certainly has lots of examples. Alternatively, Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic in Storytelling with Data talks a lot about how to improve what effectively were bad graphics. So just to think about it, when you're thinking about do no harm, there's a couple of questions around: does my analysis or visualization add the value that we'd want it to? And also just thinking as well about what is it going to be used for. So is it fit for purpose, and actually does that purpose make sense? One of my pet peeves, there's a few, but one of them is the references that we get of the data says this. So particularly around inexperienced analysts or people who are not really using data very often, they'll present something and say the data says this, and primarily that's because they've pulled some data from a system, they've done something with it, maybe they brought it into Tableau, they've applied a few filters and gone, voila, here it goes, the data says this. I think as analysts it's important to remember that any analysis you do is actually a construct. You've taken a data source that you've chosen, you've applied certain fields, you've chose to ignore other fields, you've chosen specific date ranges, you've added some filters. Basically you've put this whole analysis through a specific methodology that you've designed. Therefore there is that piece around taking a little bit of responsibility for that and saying actually it's not the data says this, it's more the analysis from the data that we've put together and the application of our methodology shows this. It might seem a little bit splitting hairs, but actually I think that it's that mentality of not necessarily just relying on the data, but it's more about your construct. I think we come to that a little bit later on. And I think just as well, being aware of the impact that choices have on your findings. So is the time period that you're choosing representative of the whole year? Is there seasonality or a trend that needs to be accounted for? So recently I've been doing a lot of work with a couple of police forces who've been doing some activity analysis. Now their activity analysis has been over the last couple of months. It's really good to understand what people are doing, but is it representative of the whole year? Well, the argument would be that we see an increase in incidents for policing in the summer. When it gets hot, there's more social interactions, incident volumes increase in sort of June, July, August. So therefore, should we really be counting that? Is it representative, or would we need to account for the seasonality and trend that is going on there? So understanding that the choices you have will impact the results you get. Seek not to just answer, but to understand. I think this is it's more a mental concept here, but just thinking here around when you're doing something, am I just trying to answer a question, or am I actually looking to understand exactly what's going on, what's causing it, and go much deeper into the problem there? So I'll take an example here of when I used to work for an airline. So a typical question you might get asked is, okay, what's happening to business class bookings on route X? So the answer to this, if we were to look at it, might be, oh well, bookings are down 12% versus last year. Okay, that's answered the question, job done, on to the next bit. Possibly, but my view would be that to do good analysis, there are a few other things you'd want to answer. So is down 12% versus last year good or bad? Which may sound a bit odd, but last year we might have sold out too quickly, so too cheap. There's potentially a revenue piece there. What we're looking here by bookings, we're talking about volume rather than overall revenue. So do we have to look at other metrics? It might also be worth comparing that to other routes. So down 12% might seem bad, but if all the other routes are down 25%, then actually down 12's possibly not a bad result. And actually, if we are down and that's a bad thing, what's it been caused by? So do we understand where the bookings have come from? Is it the fact that more people are flying in first class than in business class, or have things changed? Can we get a bit more understanding of that? So in what is a very simple example, there's very much this piece around searching for context, asking yourself, so what? And if we can find out what's the call to action? What should we be doing about this? So very much around understanding the wider problem, not just answering the first question that's been posed. Bar charts are the data viz broccoli. Now, might seem a bit odd, but my thinking behind this is the broccoli is very few people's favourite vegetable. It's not particularly exciting, but broccoli's full of iron and some vitamins and all that sort of thing. I don't particularly like broccoli, but I do realise that it is good for me. Therefore, occasionally, it finds its way onto my plate. So, and I think bar charts are very similar. That actually they might not be the most exciting way to show your data, but actually they're pretty good. They're really good at they're really effective at putting across a message. People are used to them, and actually it's a good bar chart is difficult to beat. I think just another point on this, that we all do like to make fun stuff, and Tableau is amazing at that. It has Tableau has almost limitless potential to make some really fun graphics, but sometimes keeping things simple is more effective. It's easier to communicate. So on that whole point of making fun stuff and things, one of the questions that I'd always pose to analysts who are maybe trying to push the boundaries at work is, well, are you being paid to entertain or to inform? And I think there's, depending on the audience and what you're doing things for, might be very different. So bar charts I think are great for corporate work, that sort of thing, and certainly if it is your day-to-day job, then actually keeping things simple might be really really good. Whereas if you're looking at things like Makeover Monday, or if it's something for yourself where you're looking to challenge the boundaries of Tableau, then data as art, sort of things that Neil Richards does, all that sort of thing, knock yourself out. I think it's amazing. I think my whole point on bar charts being the data viz broccoli is sometimes simple is actually very effective. I think the fourth point is very much around everyone has a different worldview. So what do I mean by that is that if you were to take the concept of what makes a good holiday, so some people would say the best holiday destination would be rural Scotland. Based on my accent, I might have a little bit of a little bit of skin in the game there. Or others might say, no, I want a big city. I want the hustle and bustle. And actually, it all depends on where you're coming from. It all depends on your perspective. And I think actually, when it comes to analysis and business in general, that actually does play out quite a bit. So everybody will have a different perspective on the world, but actually as an analyst, sometimes it's useful to change your own perspective by trying to put yourself in the client's shoes. So having a think about who's asking this question, why are they asking it, and what action are they looking to take off the back of it, can be quite interesting. So one of the analyst superpowers would be empathy. I think empathy is a really powerful emotion. Not only like understanding their perspective and putting yourself in their shoes, but actually looking to second guess what they would do. So anticipating some of the questions and concerns that might come from a client. In the past, people have pushed back and said, "Oh, you're doing all that, but it just seems like additional work. What's the benefit?" But actually, if you put yourself in their shoes and are able to anticipate some of the questions, it means that you're forewarned before you get into certain meetings. One of the other things that I became aware of very early on in my career was that as an analyst, you might be doing a piece of work that is your whole world for a couple of weeks. You're doing all this analysis, you're going through this really complex methodology to sit down for a meeting with someone. Now, it's the biggest thing on your plate, but from a client's point of view, it's a half an hour or an hour's meeting as part of a meeting that they've got 10 hours worth of meetings that day. So something that seems amazingly big for you might actually be very, very minor for the client. So understanding that, and also, contrary to that, is the fact that if you're submerged into this world of analysis, quite quickly you become the subject matter expert on a specific area. So understanding that, I think, can be quite crucial. Does your analysis pass the sniff test? Now we've got a doggy there who's looking out. He's got a great sense of smell, sniffing away. But does your analysis pass that sniff test? So, yeah, the dog's got a good sense of smell. That could be the milk from the fridge from yesterday. Do you believe the analysis and what it's telling you? Does it feel about right? So, if you were to have a null hypothesis, what would it be? And does your analysis back that up, or does it come contrary to that? And if it's different to that, and it's different to the expectations, are you primed to answer the follow-up questions? Can you explain why it's different? Because if somebody's expecting, in their mind, they're expecting something to come back and say, the sky is blue. If you come back and say, like we do very often in the UK, that the sky is actually grey, then actually you have to be able to back that up and say, why is it? Well, we've had weather systems for the past X, whatever that would be. Terrible example, but there is that question of being able to back up your work there. I think at times analysis can feel like an episode of Mythbusters. So, are the findings positive, or are you going to bust the null hypothesis or the myths that are going on within organisations? I think the one critical thing when it comes to the sniff test is checking your work. Certainly with Tableau, as soon as you get more complicated, so the more complex the methodology, the more points of failure. So particularly around level of detail, table calculations, that just checking that the numbers are actually coming out as you'd expect them to be, the filters that are applied are correct, and if in doubt, getting someone to check it for you and just go, can you have a quick look? It's not coming out as I quite expect. Can you just make sure that I'm not doing anything silly there? And 9 times out of 10, it's probably what you've got is probably fine, but occasionally it might bring something up there. Defaults are not your friend. Number 6. My wife loves Titanic. It's her favourite movie. And I think there's probably something to be said about that iceberg. When it comes to data visualization, I very much think that the metaphor or the example of an iceberg is pretty good. That the visualization or the end product that is the bit that is shown to everyone, i.e. the tip of the iceberg, is actually a very small proportion of the overall work that goes in when you start to think about things like designing your methodology, gathering data, cleaning that data, sorting out your calculations, sorting everything, the Tableau workbooks out, and then sense checking. That actually the visualization point is potentially quite a small part of the overall analytical work that you would do. And actually, when we think about that, when you're doing the visualization, you're making choices. So consciously or implicitly, you make choices about the colors you use, the fonts, the design, the chart types even, and the annotations that you put onto the page. Now, what we've got here on the right hand side is a pretty bog standard bit of analysis. We've taken Superstore, we've done a couple of things with it, dropped on some measures, some dimensions, and said, yay, that looks okay. I had some feedback from a client a few years back that went something along the lines of this. If I didn't make the effort to change the defaults in the charts, what else couldn't I be bothered to do within the analysis? Now, it was just a little bit there that's saying actually, if we jump back to this piece that says all the work you've done, the data visualization is just a small part, but it's the small part that's been shown to the client. There's then that whole point to say, well, actually, if we've got the chance, let's make that as good, or change the defaults just to show that we have put the effort in there. At the time I thought it was odd, but actually it does make a little bit of sense now. Number 7, I think this is pretty critical. Your analysis, your responsibility. So I've got a quote here from Mark that's attributed to Mark Twain, that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. I think that is one of these things that we see within organisations, that as soon as we've got plenty of examples of a statistic becomes gospel even before it's been checked. So something that might be mentioned once in a presentation is suddenly shared across the whole organisation. So if you're the person who's given that statistic, you better be ready to be responsible for the spread of that wildfire, because once it starts, it's very difficult to get it back in the box. I think making your caveats or your limitations explicit on the screen or page can be very important. I think actually a lot of people will look at analysis and then try and read far too much into it. So certainly there are that place to say, making sure that you know what the limitations of your analysis are. My experience, certainly, you get into far more trouble if you start guessing than people who just said, actually I don't know, I can check. And actually with Tableau we've got that ability to check very quickly, so because we can just open up the workbook, make a change to a couple of filters, or change things very quickly, we'd be able to get answers back potentially within the meeting. So obviously that I don't know, but check for me is far better and gives me far more confidence than knowing people are guessing. I think knowing the limits of your analysis, sort of touched on previously, that the best analysts I know will actually say, they're not afraid to say, no, the assumptions we make no longer hold if you extrapolate things to this extent. I think that's key to do that. It's your analysis, your responsibility when you're presenting these things. So these are the 7 that I've got. Do no harm, seek not just to understand, and not just to answer but to understand. The bar charts are data viz broccoli. Everyone's got a different worldview. Does the analysis pass the sniff test? The defaults are definitely not your friend. And finally, your data, your responsibility. Because I'm a consultant and we're told to under promise and over deliver, I have got an 8th here. Just the final thought, that you actually have far more power than you think. And this isn't a great example, but what we've got here is I did a little bit of data viz for the storytelling with data challenge for July. So taking a not ideal chart, revisiting and making it better. Put it out there. That was fine. Didn't think too much more of it. A month later, I just checked it and saw that we had best part of 4,500 impressions. So it's been out. People have seen that sort of thing. So I suppose one of the things I wanted to put out, especially with social media these days, but actually also within your organisation, that your reach is possibly far greater than you anticipate. So first thing is, expect your analysis or your vizzes or whatever you're doing to be seen by many people. We always talk in presentations or in reports of do this with your audience in mind. Sure, but actually also think about this, where this could go. So write it as if it's going to go to the board. That way you won't be embarrassed. So there is that key piece that actually, if it were to be escalated, if this does become viral, even within the organisation, and lots of people are seeing it, I'd actually be quite happy to put my name to that. So something else to bear in mind. So that's it from me, and I'd now welcome any questions.